Hey everybody, Doc Brown here with a quick video lesson. What I just played is one of Joe Pass's intros he used on the tune Satin Doll. So he's recorded the tune Satin Doll a handful of times. There's some great live versions floating around on YouTube, but the particular version I'm referencing here is off the 1975 album Portraits of Duke Ellington, which Joe Pass recorded as a tribute to Duke Ellington right after Duke Ellington passed away. So it's a great trio album. It's Joe Pass, playing all Duke Ellington standard tunes. So highly recommend it if you haven't checked it out. So I'm going to break down this 4-bar intro in this video. If you're interested in following along, as always, I've posted a PDF down below in the video description. While you're down there, you can check out my links to social media. There's a link if you want to leave me a tip if you enjoy this lesson. And of course, subscribing and liking always helps. And in the comments, if you want to, leave suggestions or requests for future tunes or lesson ideas you may want me to cover, feel free. So let's dive into this tune, this intro here. So Satin Doll is basically in the key of C major primarily. So this is a 4-bar intro that's going to lead right into that. So the first chord of Satin Doll is going to be D minor 7, or the 2 chord in C major. So the harmonic framework for our intro is going to be 2, 5, 1, 6, which in C is going to be D minor 7 is our 2, 5 chord is G7, our 1 is C major 7, and then for our 6th chord, we're thinking 5 of 2, so we're treating it as a dominant 7 to lead us into the tune. So that's going to be A7, where if we were in a diatonic situation, of course, it'd be A minor 7. But since we want to, lead into that D minor 7, we're going to do a 5 of 2, A7. And if you caught some of the things I did when I played this intro at the start of the video, or if you've heard it before, there are some other harmonic devices going on over this, 2, 5, 1, 6 framework. So I'm going to break all those down and talk about how they work. So let's start with the first measure. If you listen to the recording, the first thing you're going to hear actually is the bass player play a G, which might be kind of confusing because I just told you I'm thinking of the first measure as D minor 7. Well, let me explain. So the first measure, basically the sound is going to be G7 sus or G9 sus. We can get that type of sound by thinking D minor 7 all over a G bass note. So basically, you can think of this first measure as your G7 sus, G9 sus, or really like a 2, 5, 1 to C, D minor 7, G7, C major 7. So I'm thinking, like I said, this first measure, D minor 7. So this is the little chordal lick he plays. Let's break that down. Let's just start with the melody. So from D minor 7 point of view, he's playing G, which is the 11th, E, the 9th, C, flat 7th, and A, the 5th. So it's like he's descending through an A minor 7 arpeggio there. And this is cool because those first 3 notes, G, E, and C, are all color tones. They're upper chord structures and extensions that exist outside the 3-note D minor triad. So these more colorful notes are really important to the sound of jazz, right? So let's talk about now how he harmonizes each of these chords. This first chord that he uses is another classic Joe Passism. So whenever he has a minor harmony where the 11th is in the melody, he's going to use this type of chord a lot. And this is really interesting because there's actually no third in there. All these chords or voicings I'm going to show you are going to have a 3rd and a 7th in them. And the 3rd and 7th are important, of course, because the 3rd tells us whether the chord is major or minor, and the 7th tells us what type of 7th chord it is. And of course, 7th chords are very important in jazz music. So this chord, if we're thinking from D minor, doesn't have an F in there. So no 3rd. If we're thinking from G7, doesn't have the 7th in there. So we have D, which is going to be the root. A is the 5th. C is going to be our flat 7. And finally, G is going to be that 11th there. So it's almost like it is a D7 sus voicing. Really, you could resolve that G down to F sharp for a regular D7. But like I said, this is covering a minor 11 sound. Just no 3rd in there. And you'll hear him use this idea all over the place in other tunes. There's a couple instances in the actual melody of Satin Doll where it's a minor harmony where the 11th is in the melody. Oops, excuse me. So you're going to see that come up. So I'm getting away from the intro now. Let's get back to it. So this is the first chord again. Our second chord has that 9th in the melody. It's basically an F major 7 style voicing, but when we put it over D, it gives us that D minor 9 sound. So we have C, flat 7, F, flat 3, A, that's the 5th, and then the 9th on top, E. Our next chord is a D minor 7 sound. A, D, F, C, 5, 1, flat 3, flat 7. And then our final chord for this first measure is going to be like another F major 7 sound over D, D minor 9. So we have F, C, E, A, flat 3, flat 7, 9, and the 5th. And this little harmonized arpeggio idea, Joe Pass uses it all the time, and his solo playing, whether like in an actual solo or a chord melody, you're going to hear it left and right. You'll hear him return to it when he plays the melody in this tune. In fact, he goes. So this type of idea is really worth taking through all 12 keys, trying it out on different string sets and different harmonic situations. A really hip idea from these just, 4 chords. All right, so that's measure 1. Let's move on to measure 2. So now we're over our actual G7 chord here, and this is what he plays. So this is another Joe Passism. He's playing these little chord stabs between these single line things to outline the harmony. So he starts with this G7 rootless voicing. We have 7, 3, and 13. And then he just goes up diatonically until we arrive to our flat 9, which is A flat or G sharp. And basically for this voicing, he's taking that same one we started with, and just adding that A flat on top. And then he descends back down and resolves it to C major 7 on the and of 4 there. So whenever we have a chord like this, I always like to analyze it and see what's going on with it, if it can inform, our solo or single line playing. So this is a G7, G13 with a flat 9 in here. So this is coming out of the G half whole diminished scale. And what's cool about it is on top you have an E major triad. So if you're in a solo situation where this comes up, you have to improvise over that chord, you could play maybe like a G7 arpeggio mixed with an E major type of sound. Anyways, we're getting away from the lesson again, but it's always cool to analyze the chords and see what's in them, and if you could pull any ideas into your improvisatory type things. So resolves to C major 7 again on and of 4. Now we're in measure 3, our 1 chord, and we don't hear much of the 1 chord actually in this. We get some more, clever Joe Pass harmonic devices. So he heads up to the 4 chord, keeps this all major 7ths here, just parallel movement. He's going to descend by whole step, finally resolving it by half step back to the 1 chord. This is really cool. So he heads up to the 4 chord, F major 7, E flat major 7, and then our D flat major 7 resolves by half step to our C major 7. And you're going to hear him do this once again in other tunes and other places. One that comes to mind, he's got a live duo album with Niels Henning Orsted Peterson, where they're playing Have You Met Miss Jones? And he basically takes this idea and expands it to a whole intro. So this is just one measure of this intro. He takes that idea and uses it for a whole intro in Have You Met Miss Jones? So I believe he actually starts, instead of from the 4 on the 5, and then this isn't exact, but he goes, and then that resolves into our F. So he plays it, I think, with like a little bossa rhythm, and he repeats, those 4 chords before he resolves it. But it's just another classic Joe Pass type of idea that we see show up again and again. So that's the genius of Joe Pass, is that he has all these ideas and he just mastery over them, to improvise them, to include them in an arrangement, this, that, and the other. So let's get on to our final measure now here. So like I said, we can think of this measure basically being our 6 chord or our 5 of 2. Obviously, some more stuff is happening than that. So let's analyze it. So he starts on an F sharp minor 7, walks it down to an E minor 7. So we go F sharp minor 7, F minor 7, E minor 7, our A7 altered, which I'll break down. But then this all resolves to the D minor 7, the first measure of our tune, right? So that E minor 7 becomes a 2. And then we have A7 5 to our D minor. So it's 2 5 1 to D minor basically there. And this That first F sharp to F minor, we could just think of that as parallel movement, but we could go a step further to analyze that. So we could think of it as just like a longer sequence of 2/5. So starting from that F sharp minor, basically thinking of that as a 2/5 leading into that E minor. And then that E minor A7 becomes a 2/5 of D. So basically how I'm treating then that F minor 7 is a tritone sub of that B7. So I know typically maybe you've seen tritone subs where we're just swapping out dominant chords, but you can, use minor chords in certain applications. Here it works nicely because we have the parallel movement. So there's a couple different ways you can look at that theoretically. Either way, the important thing is it sounds cool. So that's the intro right there. One more time. And that last chord I said I was going to break down. So this is an A7 sharp 9 with a flat 13 in there. So you have the root. You could play it open, or I think I may have wrote it down on the 5th fret there. But 7, flat 7, 3, flat 13 or sharp 5, and sharp 9 on top. And then we're into our tune. All right, I really hope you enjoyed this breakdown of this little intro of Joe Pass's 4-bar intro to Satin Doll there. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. If you have suggestions for future lessons, future tunes, or things you want me to cover, of course, leave those in the comments. And once again, thank you for stopping by and checking out the channel, and I'll catch you guys next time.